In this problem, we're asked to construct the truth table for the statement quantity P implies negation R and the negation of the quantity R or negation Q. So we begin, as always, since we have three statements here, to set up our truth table for three statements. Remember, when setting up a truth table for three statements, we start by doubling the P and Q rows. So P and Q normally goes true, true. So we would write down true, true twice. And then it would be true, false. So we put down true, false twice. Then it would be false, true. So again, we put that down twice. And then finally, false, false. And then once we have those columns for P and Q filled out, R is very easy. For R, we go down through the R column, alternating just true and false. Now, as I mentioned before, it is very important to make sure that as you're writing these rows down, that we do put them down in the right order. Because if you have something out of order, and you don't have that same order, then things are not going to work out the way we'd like them to work out. Now, we need to start looking at the pieces that make up our statement. Okay. We have a conditional inside grouping symbols that we need to work out. We also have so we have our conditional here. We also have this quantity. Now that quantity is also being negated. So we're going to need to work that out and then negate it. And then finally, separating everything, we have an and statement. That's going to come at the very end. So as I look at this piece right here, I say, well, to do that, I'm going to need to know what negation of R is. So the very first thing I'm going to do is say, okay, let's do negation of R. So we'll underline on that part. I'll come down here and say, okay, I want to do negation of R. So I look at the R column, and I'm going to write down the opposite values each time. So that would be false, true, false, true, false, true, false, true. Right, just looking at the R column and negating it. Now that I've negated the R column, I can now focus on the whole statement, P arrow negation R. And so focus on that whole statement now. Now to do P arrow negation R, I need to look at the P column and the R column, remembering our condition for negation. Negation is only going to be false when the first is true and the second is false. And as we look at our two rows here, true implies false, we can see that right off the bat we get one of those scenarios. Then we have true implies true, would be true. Now we have once again another true implies false, would be false. Another true implies true, would be true. And from this point on, the first statement's false. So if the first statement's false, well, then it's going to automatically be true. So now as I move along to my statement, I have taken care of that first piece, the green underlined piece here. So now I move over to this part. And working this out, I'm going to first need to deal with the stuff inside the grouping symbols. So that means my first part up is our negation Q. You may want to take a moment and go ahead and do that. Okay, and if you're taking the time to do that, we'll now have negation Q as we have here. Again, just looking at the Q column and writing down the opposite values. Moving on now, we now have this quantity inside here, R and negation Q. Okay, I'm sorry, I said R and negation Q, I really meant R or negation Q. So we're going to look at the R and the negation Q columns and apply our condition for OR. OR is true as long as one of them is true, or alternatively, only false as one of them is false. So first we have a true or a false, and that would be false. We then have a false or false. I'm sorry, man, I just cannot keep things straight here. True or false would be true. Apologize for that. False or false would be false. True or true would be true. So we fill a few more out. False or true would be true. True or false would be true. Bringing us down to false or false, which would be false. True or true, which would be true. And false or true, which would be true. Okay. And so now we're almost to the end. Now that we've worked out the R or negation Q, we can now come out here and say, okay, now I need to do negation of all that stuff. So I'm going to look at that column, the blue column here, and I'm going to write down the opposite truth values for everything I see there. And you may want to take a moment and go ahead and do that. And if you now pause the video and just take a look, you can see that the blue column has now been negated into the purple column. Now what I've done is written the opposite value for each one of those. Now finally, after going through that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 operations, we can now finally do the whole thing. And what we're going to look at is the P or negation R column. This one right here. And our last column, the purple column. And we're going to go through row by row, joining those together with an AND statement. When we start off, we have a false and false. And again, what do we know about an AND statement? An AND is only going to be true when they're both true. And since I am kind of out of room here, I'm just going to say, you know what? That goes there. So we go through false and false. Will be false. Now we have a true and a true would be true. False and a false would be false. True and false would be false. Again, a true and a false would be false. True and a true would be true. True and false would be false. And finally, true and false would be false. And so we have our result. This thing will only be true 2 times. We can go back and see the 2 times. When P is true and Q is true, but R is false, then the whole result is true. And then also when P is false, Q is true, and R is false, then the whole thing turns out to be true. Otherwise, it's a false statement. So hopefully this little bit more complicated example will help you as you're working with some of the tougher truth tables.